You don't want to be in the camera, all you have to do is to stay a bit over there and you will not be in the camera.
So today we are very happy to have Professor Michele Boudrin from Washington University, St. Louis, to come here. And he is a distinguished economist, as you all know, and he will be visiting us. He is now visiting us until November the 10th. So, and he has also kindly agreed to give 2 guest lectures for this course. So this week and the next week. And I think all you guys have seen his CVs. So without further ado, let's welcome Professor Michele Boudrin.
Okay, thank you. So as I was, thanks for the invitation, first of all. As I was saying, if my English goes too Italian or too confused or too fast, stop and ask, okay? Otherwise, the conversation will not proceed well. All right, here is what I plan to do. I plan to start from a description of growth. In fact, let me tell you. Hello, dear. We'll let the carol sing. In fact, one thing that is marginal, but I think it's important, is that we don't really have a growth theory. In the sense that the question, what causes growth, in the sense of economic growth, is both trivial, and the answer is what causes growth is using factors of production better to make better factors of production, minimize the cost of energy per unit of utils. That's the cause of growth, right? Which is also the description of what growth is, right? But then it's almost an unanswerable question, because the way we look at growth historically, we have seen it happening in very different ways, in a very distributed way around the globe, in a very unequal way. Some societies grew at a certain point faster than others. If you think the Egyptian civilization was very old and much more advanced than what you would think Neanderthal man was or primitive hunter-gatherer were, right? So there was a lot of growth there, or obviously, the Chinese initial civilization, and then they stopped, and then they started growing again. And if one starts looking carefully, the study of growth is mostly history with a discipline of analytical tools. History with the discipline of analytical tool. It's a bit of a myth of the last 200-300 years, where some technologies have become dominant because more efficient worldwide, and have made the world a more integrated system, that we tend to think as if there is a common cause for growth. But I think we should be very careful there. We should use more historical insight and understand that what might have become a rule, and maybe acting like a rule, for the last 200-300 years, need not be the truth. In some sense, the magical mechanism, right? We haven't really discovered the atom or the protons or the neutrons. And most of our theories, most of our models are in fact description. So let me start from the elementary description, which is the one an engineer or an accountant would give of a production system. The description is due to John von Neumann in an old article published in German in the middle 30s, I think 1934, which I consider the first analytical contribution to what we call growth theory, and still a fairly unsurpassed one, because if you look at it carefully, it contains most of what we need, and that it's worth building upon. Before Schumpeter, and I will go back to that, before von Neumann, another person, Schumpeter, had also contributed insights, more at an intuitive, historical level, and I will go back to that. in the next lecture. So we will start from von Neumann in the 30s, and then in the next lecture we will go back to Schumpeter, because Schumpeter, I think, played a very crucial role. First, absolutely first, no doubt on this, to make it very clear in the history of economic thought that there is a very big difference between studying economies that are static from a technological viewpoint and economies that are dynamic from a technological viewpoint. And that this modifies even the notion of equilibrium we have to use to model them. Von Neumann, matter of fact, describes a static economy. In von Neumann, there is no technological change. And so the topic of my second lecture will basically be, let's take von Neumann, add Schumpeter to it, shake it, and see what kind of cocktail we get if we get a dynamic story with technological change. Okay? So today, we're just going to talk about economies with a constant technology, basically. With a little bit of a deviation. At a certain point, I will be asking you some questions. So, what is the von Neumann does? Von Neumann says, look, the unit of analysis, we're going to call it commodity. And commodity are those things humans use, consume, produce. So obviously you can classify them in a variety of ways, in very detailed ways, depending on how micro you want to go. We can talk about cars, or we can talk about small cars, mid-size, SUV, trucks, or we can talk about Toyota that model, Honda that model, Ford that model, Hyundai that model, and you can go down little details, right? Depending on our interest, our analytical interest, descriptive interest, we can classify commodities very finely or very coarsely, correct? So we can talk about sweater, or we can talk about Missoni sweater versus H&M sweater. They're very different, right? But they're both sweater. One costs $2,000, the other costs $20. All right, so take that as given. What matters is, von Neumann says, at a certain point in time, for a given technology, there are n commodities, where n is a number. 3, 1 million, 1 fantastic zillion, you choose. So there are n commodities. And then he says commodities are both used and produced. So they're both inputs and output. Some commodities are only input. Very hard to find a commodity that's only input. You know, one thing, coal. Well, coal is an input in many processes, but it's the output of the mining activity. Food is only a consumption good? Well, maybe it depends. If I try to model survival, von Neumann actually thought we ought to do that. One of the things we have to put in the growth model is the demographic and growth of people. Then it's an input. So it's very hard. Depending again on what you use in the description of growth for, you may classify some commodity as only input, some as only output, some as both. Okay, it doesn't matter. The point is that input or output are linked by what von Neumann called an activity or an industry. Okay, and there are m of them. So I will call them activities, as in activity analysis. A field of subfield of linear programming, or an application of linear programming to economic and not only economic topics that it's very worth studying. It's relatively simple. It's essentially some vector algebra with a little bit of set theory, but very useful. So let's talk about activities. An activity, so a commodity is just a commodity. It's a name and a unit of measure. So sweater, we measure them in units, and water, we measure it in liters or in gallons, and gasoline, we also, so on, right? And sugar, we measure it in kilos. Activities are a pair of input-output, two lists. So an activity A is a pair of this type. say that you put in x and you get y. X and y are two vectors of commodities. x1, x2, xn produces y1, y2, yn. In any given activity, there's a lot of zeros, right? Both in the input and in the output. I don't know, you don't use gasoline to dress a salad. That's an activity. Right? Make a salad is an activity. You don't use fire to make a gin and tonic. Things like that. Okay? So there are a lot of zeros, but that's the two. If you think of it, there's extremely little theory here other than merceological classification of what a commodity is. And here the notion that production is a human activity that defines the basic working of an economic system, that takes things that exist at time t and turns into things that did not exist before but come to existence at time t plus 1. How much time goes between t and t plus 1? Oh, that depends again. In the same way that how big is n will depend on the level of abstraction we are working on. How long is the time that goes between t and t plus 1 will depend on what we're doing. You see, in this moment, we're carrying out an activity, right? The inputs are you, me, the chalk, the blackboard, the chairs, the building, blah, 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 our time, our skills, the fact that I can speak English to you, that you can understand English. These are all aspects of you and me that makes us specific commodities different from other. If we go and pick a person from the street and we put it in class or put it in my place, this activity is not going to work unless the person on the street knows von Neumann. Okay? And if we put there somebody that doesn't know a bit of algebra, that doesn't understand that I just wrote two column vectors, they will look at that and say, what the hell? Right? Right? So that we are this. Within 3 hours, we will be that. There will be a different us. You may have learned or not learned something. You may have learned the Bouldrine is full of it and says nonsense, or that something about von Neumann, or may have just repeated things you already knew. Whatever. Point is that you're going to be something that you were not before. I'm going to be something that I didn't know I was not before. I will have learned things from you, and so on. Maybe there will be fewer pieces of chalk in the room and blah, blah, blah. Right? So it's a description. Okay? It's an engineering description, but it's an intelligent description, in my opinion. It's very useful. It's very useful as a starting point for theorizing. Okay? So what is the von Neumann says? It says, look, for a constant technology, this is enough. A technology is a list of commodities that either exist or we know how to produce. We know how to produce is a word that has to be considered carefully. We know how to produce means there are the inputs necessary to produce that thing. And one of those inputs, or many of those inputs, are the knowledge. Typically in here or in textbooks, manual instructions, depending on which period of history we're looking at, could be computer program or could be simply artisan knowledge of how to plant and grow rice, right? In any case, that's an input. Right? So an economy is a list of commodity, a list of knowledge and inputs to produce them and reproduce them, and a classification of the activities, plus a unit of time, where the units of time has to be chosen in such a way that the activity, the last of the list, you understand me? In chronological time is encompassed by it. And all the others are broken down in sub-pieces. So if the activity that you're considering, that is the fast, that lasts an hour, and another one lasts 3 hours, then the other one becomes 3 activities. The one that goes from time 0 to time 1, the one that goes from time 1 to time 2, and the third one that goes from time 2 to time 3, right? And so the number of commodities here may increase in a proper description because it includes the intermediate product, right? Remember that if you compute value added, it depends a lot on the unit of time you choose. Something that people don't understand about GMP, but value added is it's a flow. So it's very time dependent, and what's an intermediate product, what's a final product, depend on when you cut in time, right? That's something that von Neumann had very clear in mind. Man was very smart. Person that the more you read, the more you study, the more you admire. Some people are smarter than us, or at least than me. That was okay. Okay, so is that clear? So let's introduce a few more symbols. So the symbols are going to be, we're going to denote the set A, that's okay. A is going to be the set of A's activities such that, A is defined as a pair xt yt plus 1, okay? Where xt belongs in Rn plus and yt plus 1 belongs also in Rn plus. That's the set of activities, okay? The cardinality of that set is M for this exercise. Fixed technology. So, technological change, as you will see next week, from the point of view of von Neumann, and in my opinion, from any point of view, amounts to changing the cardinality of the activity set. Amounts to introducing another activity. Okay? The technology changes, and this is something that Schumpeter had clear. If you read Schumpeter, given that I'm going to talk, you will see that he was very careful at pointing out that when we talk about technological change and innovation, we don't have to focus only on the famous things. The steam engine, the electric engine, the jet, the diesel engine. Also because those inventions really did not exist as a single invention. They were the product of accumulation of little invention. When we say James Watt, steam engine, we think, steam engine. We thought, there was no steam engine before, then this guy James Watt got into a lab, started doing things, and he came out with a steam engine. Not true. The Romans had the steam engine. People had been using steam engine for a variety of reasons before. His contribution, quite important, was actually to take a steam engine that he was actually fixing, that was his job, right? And figuring out that if he had a separate condenser for the steam, it would have become extremely more efficient and smaller and more portable, blah, blah, blah. So that was the great contribution. And other were added. And the same is true for electric engines that came in pieces. So the point that Schumpeter made was, if you look carefully, the process of invention is actually continuous. It's always some little perturbation. There is a sense in which today we're being innovators, right? For the decision that we have undertaken to put the inputs together and do something that we had not done before and produce new commodities. Now you say, well, that becomes a very dark night in which every cow is grey, correct? But it makes you understand that the process of economic innovation is continuous, and it may be faster or slower, more intense or less intense, and that's a quantitative matter. And the point of the empirical and theoretical analysis is to be able to separate the big event from the small event. The first order event that is worth considering to the second, third order event that doesn't really have an aggregate impact. So probably today, the fact that we did produce the new goods that will come out of our 3 hours may not change the history of the world. And so we are going to treat this as a regular process of accumulation. In another situation, if we had founded Apple today, we would consider that a major innovation. Okay? So that's the thing we want to keep in mind. Changing a technological progress means, in this word, changing the cardinality of this set, introducing a new A. Okay? Now, let's do a bit of background activity analysis to understand how we're going to use this system. Remember, an activity is an input-output pair. Input-output. I'm not good at drawing high-dimensional graphs, so you will have to use your imagination. There is Rn here and Rn here. Okay? Can you imagine the high-dimensional space here and the high-dimensional space there? So what's an activity? An activity in this space is just a point.